We're going to continue our discussion of reading comprehension, and I'd encourage you to look at the other tape related to the cognitive turn, but also the one that begins to deal with the teaching of reading comprehension and the teaching of reading. Particularly today I will focus at the beginning on the shift to taking into account the theories of meaning making, constructivism and schema theory and the like, and also the movement towards metacognition, the concept of learning to learn and developing students an awareness of task and strategy and ability to assess themselves. But I'd like to look again at the circumstances, the emphases relative to instruction and research on instruction that was occurring leading up to the cognitive turn. And as I've tried to map out somewhat over here, that the emphasis was, as is predictable given the results from research, on trying to discern what makes an effective teacher. And numerous studies were done, particularly observational studies, which were referred to oftentimes as process product research, as people tabulated teachers' behaviours and student behaviours, teachers giving directions, teachers asking different types of questions, teacher criticism, teacher praise, student-initiated comments, student responses to questions, and so on, and correlated it with achievement. This was the predominant way that people sort of looked at effectiveness at this time. And the emphasis on the teacher research effectiveness was, I think, really more focused upon issues of delivery. And so, and from the student perspective, almost issues of reception. So in terms of delivery, oftentimes the focus was on how clear the teacher was, how business-like the teacher was, and those variables came out as fairly good predictors. And likewise, in terms of the student, the extent to which the student was on task, and there were obvious findings relative to the negative effects of criticism and so on. But there was a feeling as if that there was a need to shift in terms of teacher research, particularly as we made the cognitive turn. And I'll talk more about that as we go forward. Simultaneously with the emphasis on teacher research, you also saw an emphasis upon reading to learn. Studies of the effects of different adjuncts, things like objectives, questions that might be set, study guides that were put in place, or what other types of things, other forms of adjuncts, diagrams, something out of Ozabel's work, the use of advanced organisers, which were sort of akin to structural overviews of a passage that was to be read. And so people would oftentimes be studying these different types of adjuncts as they were assigned to a text, typically an informational text, but not necessarily always. And also reader activities. For example, it might be the child or the student using study techniques. I'm sure you're aware of some of them. A common one is SQ4R or SQ3R, or the kids being asked to visualize or take notes or to summarize. Now, what distinguishes the research at this point in time, it wasn't terribly influenced by what we knew about meaning making. It was really encouraging the students to focus on the text and to use these adjuncts and use these procedures to, in a sense, extract meaning from the text. So it was still very much tied to a concept of reading to learn from the text rather than the student creating his own meaning. The findings, however, were quite interesting. You would oftentimes get a treatment effect or an interaction effect, treatment by aptitude or ability. But typically, and I think this is the most important finding, there was a saying we had for the results of these types of studies, in that you got what you gave, but not much more. In other words, these objectives, questions, diagrams, advanced organisers did enhance your comprehension, but didn't enhance your ability to comprehend beyond that particular text. In other words, it would help you extract the information using these questions to guide you in ways that was consistent with the nature of the diagram or the advanced organizer questions. And likewise, it would enable you to, in a sense, recall more information depending upon the technique, but again, consistent with that. So it didn't give that value added. Indeed, that wasn't really the focus. The interest in this research, and interestingly, it was oftentimes funded by the military, because the military were very concerned for people's ability to read, for example, things like directions, and to make sure they read it with understanding. And so a lot of the research, again, was really focused on how do we enhance a person's ability to extract the key information from text and to remember that information. But it tended to be very specific to a single passage. And a term that one of the well-known researchers in this period, Ernest Rothkopf, coined, it did serve what he called a mathemogenic function. And that was, it did add to recall, but it didn't add beyond, in a sense, what the input was, whether it was an adjunct that was placed with the text or whether it was something the reader was being asked to do. The shift, however, in what we began to study and be interested in as we move towards the cognitive turn and into metacognitions was quite profound. But before I do that, let me also focus on what was going on in most classrooms. What was going on, as I talked about in one of the other tapes, with the support of these compendiums of pupil books leveled for kids to read, so that kids were receiving a diet of material to read along with teacher support. Actually, I shouldn't say so much teacher support, it was more teacher direction.